All right, well, today Labor are calling for coalition backbencher Gladys Liu to stand down after what can only be described as a set of a train wreck of an interview with my colleague Andrew Bolts on this network, Sky News, last night over links it's claimed that she has with a Chinese political influence operation. Last night she denied these links and rejected any suggestion that she's acting as a mouthpiece for the Communist Party. But today, when she was forced to admit a relationship with a number of organisations, she says now, albeit, are only honorary roles. Joining me now to go through the latest on this issue and the other political headlines out of Canberra today, Sky News digital editor Jack Houghton and freelance journalist and columnist Corinne Barraclough. Jack, I might start with you. You've been dealing with, obviously, the issue of Chinese influence in your previous role at the Daily Telegraph and obviously now at Sky News. This is a blow to the coalition, isn't it? Because they were able to make much of Sam Dastyari's further, forays into this policy area and obviously loss of his Senate seat, but now it's coming back to them.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess this demonstrates that when you're going to be firing off blows, you better be very careful that you don't get labelled in the glare of hypocrisy when some of these issues fall back on your own party. And look, I think that's what's being demonstrated here. This situation is not a trivial matter. She was a member of an organisation which was held up as a propaganda leg of China. And the train wreck interview, and I agree with you, there's no other way to describe it, it was a complete and utter train wreck. She was evasive, it looked overtly deceitful, and then now she's come out and saying, oh, well, I am, but now it's only going to be an honorary role. It just raises more questions. The thing that I find quite interesting, though, is I don't know what was a more extraordinary interview, personally, Sam Dastyari's or hers, because he's come out today clearly not too happy with the way that the coalition has been refusing to throw her under the bus, and he's attempting to tie together what he went through and what she went through. I think it would be a mistake to conflate those two issues, but I think it has left the coalition quite exposed.
Well, let's have a look at what Gladys Liu said last night. Now, a lot of people have made comments about her obfuscation on what Chinese groups she belonged to and not, and then also I think her mishandled defence or explanation of issues around the South China Sea. I don't hold her responsible for the South China Sea stuff. She's a backbencher. She's not a diplomat. I think she muddled her way through there enough. Could have been stronger, could have been better, but let's move there. It's what she belonged to prior to entering Parliament and her links to those organisations. That's what I find the most disturbing, but it's very different from Sam Dastyari. We'll get to that in a moment. Let's have a listen to Gladys Liu last night on the Bolt Report.
I can tell you that I cannot recall if, as is reported, that from 2003 to 2015, 12 years long, that if I can't recall, I can't be an active member of that council, can I?
How can you not recall a membership of 12 years? I mean, we've just shown your name listed there. I've got another document I can show you of your name listed in the other association. That's two associations, association lasting 12 years, and you can't recall it?
Well, I can tell you that I have never been a member of this council, and yeah, it can happen. They can put your name there without your knowledge.
And Corinne, as I said, her statement issued today, she admits to being a member of 3 separate organisations, including ones that Andrew raised last night. It's the lie, not the cover-up. I think that's the problem.
Well, basically, she said one thing last night and she's come out and said something entirely different today. If whatever side of politics you're on, you know, people expect two things. They expect politicians who are acting on their behalf to be truthful and to be consistent. And unfortunately for Gladys, she has been neither of those things.
Yeah, look, I meant to say the cover-up, not the lie, but I'm sure you all got my point. I also want to play back something from Sam Dastyari, because let's not forget, for all the histrionics and theatre that's well known about Sam Dastyari, Jack, of course, Sam Dastyari took money from Chinese donors, got them to pay for his personal expenses, fronted a press conference in Commonwealth parliamentary offices, sprouting the lines that China want to hear and offering basically to change Labor Party policy based on, you know, money going into his back pocket. Very different than Gladys Liu, but the stink of Chinese influences around them both. Let's have a listen to Sam Dastyari on David Spears just before we've come to air tonight.
I'm just asking whether there really is equivalence here. Is there equivalence here with Gladys Liu?
She has raised... David, she has raised millions for the Liberal Party. She has lied about being members of these organisations. And frankly, let's not pussyfoot around this. There is a lot more that is about to come out about Gladys Liu. And the Prime Minister is defending her for one reason and one reason alone. She happens to be a member of the Liberal Party.
Oh, well,
Do you think Labor's credibility is shot there a bit by Dastyari's entry into the debate today, Jack?
Yeah, definitely. It's not a good look. And I mean, you can't conflate the two issues for four if you're going to include the dictatorship comments. I agree with your verdict there that it's probably a bit unfair because she's not that experienced. But you've got the legal bill, so you've got direct money being paid to him for a service. Then you've got he allegedly tipped off ASIO and told somebody they may be being watched. I mean, that's a pretty damning allegation. That's about as bad as it gets. And then the third one is endorsing the expansion to the South China Sea at a press conference brazenly, and that was in breach of Labor's formal policy at the time. So when you look at those things in the totality, they're on a completely different level. But I do agree that the coalition, because they went so hard on him at the time, it does raise questions how they have to handle Liu now.
All right. There was also quite a bit in the papers today, Corin, about internal splits inside Labor over where they go policy-wise. Do they move back to the centre? I suppose Labor right would argue that. The left is saying, no, we've got to sort of dig in and stay firm on issues like the climate emergency, which, no one buys at all. But also, I think the unmasking of GetUp, there was some survey material out today too to show that, a majority of Australians see GetUp as nothing more than the campaigning arm of the left, the Greens and the Labor Party, and only a handful, less than a quarter of Australians even see them as independent. So if there's one thing that's come out of the last election campaign is that people now see GetUp for what GetUp is.
Absolutely, and that's an embarrassment. Let's not make two bones about that. But I think what's interesting really here is that Labor really doesn't have a coherent policy platform. It just doesn't know which way to turn, and this is a really dangerous time for them because if they start letting these left lunatic activists in their ear, they're going to fall apart even more. And it's really going to distract them from the really important task that they do have in front of them, which is actually establishing what policy they are going to push as we then start thinking about the next election, because they don't stand a chance right now. And as you say, I think it was over 50% of voters think that GetUp is acting on behalf of Labour and the Greens. So, voters aren't silly, and they really have seen GetUp for exactly what it is, and that is an embarrassment.
Also, Jack, what was interesting in the survey material was that 55%, so now a majority of Australians, are really backing in the mining sector. And, mining's been under some pressure. If we didn't have mining, our balance sheet would be in serious red ink. But mining has been under pressure from a really concerted effort from the left and industry super funds, activists and others. But the public is seeing through that, and it's clear in that result that they want mining to stay and they understand how important it is to the economy.
Well, it's pretty hard to replace it from the economy. And the suggestion that you're going to shut down an entire industry which generates the sheer billions of dollars in export revenue that mining does, and then not replace it with something else is just completely puerile. But Labor's mistake here is that after the election, they had this kind of quasi-explanation of saying, well, we weren't really being tough on mining. It was just a hate campaign by the coalition. We actually love mining. And then we didn't have to wait very long until that changed. I think we're looking at the trip that Scott Morrison went over to the Pacific. Then all of a sudden they were trying to back these agreements to shut down and radically shut down the industry. So Labor is going to be in a really tough position to pivot from how far they're swinging left to be able to win the next election. And I don't see them being able to do that if they don't come and try and get the moderates of Australia back.
All right, also back into the issues of donations and influence. We know in New South Wales this is the whole subject of the current ICAC hearing, inquiry into Labor donations, but this time it's a Liberal issue. We know that donations from property investors and developers are not permitted under New South Wales electoral law, but revelations today, Corin, about a New South Wales Liberal minister receiving donations that don't look like they meet the integrity test.
Well, absolutely. And, where are the politicians who do the right thing? New South Wales restrictions are very strict, but they're very clear. And dodgy dealings won't be accepted. Like I say, where are the politicians doing the right thing? This is incredibly bad timing on top of everything else when the general voting public is really got their radar up around politicians that they can trust. And yet again, it looks like someone's done something dodgy.
Yeah, the minister involved is John Sidoti, and it looks like he also has commercial interests at the same time as being a minister, a bit like the Chief of Staff of Anastasia Palaszczuk, all these people that can do their day job and run around the edges with all these investments and other goings-on, seemingly must do it in the middle of the night, I don't know. But it's not a good look inside the Berejiklian government, is it, Jack?
No, definitely not. And look, they've been quite tight-lipped, I would say, regarding the Kayla Murnane situation with Kenrick Chi and the $100,000 bag. We can only guess why. There's a lot of issues in New South Wales government more broadly that's encompassing both sides. But the issue here with Sidoti, with his commercial properties, it's quite an extraordinary story. He had a trust set up and he had an undeclared business interest. Where was it? I think it was in 5 Doc. Wasn't declared for 6 years and only came out with a bundle of documents kind of against, he didn't forthcomingly tell people about this. So I can only imagine what else hasn't really been declared. And whether or not this is technically illegal or talking about broader allegations of corruption, I don't think it passes the pub test. And I think right now in New South Wales specifically, people, I think they're a bit fed up with seeing what's happening behind the scenes. I think right now they're going to be very careful to do everything by the book. And if anything else is going on, I think they need to end it right now and run a clean shop.
How hard is it just to abide by the laws that the parliamentarians of New South Wales put in themselves, Corinne? I mean, no ordinary Australian gets away with all the manner of excuses that these guys, left and right, are trying to get away with in New South Wales.
And it really makes them all look like they're just on the make. It doesn't... Where are the conviction politicians who are really in this to make a difference? They really believe that they want to, fight for their communities and fight for the people that they're there to represent? Or is everyone just running around trying to make a fast buck? It's a really bad look.
Yeah, and it's funny, all of this is going on. All of these urgent issues in New South Wales need fixing, integrity issues inside the parliament, left and right. But the biggest issue they want to talk about is reform, or so-called reform to abortion laws in New South Wales. And if it was just decriminalisation, I'd have a very open mind and I would support changes, certainly at the early term of a pregnancy. But by God, I am up in arms about the lack of spine of these parliamentarians on things like late-term abortions, on gender selection, on what could amount to the coercion of women, lack of choice, lack of information, lack of support, lack of counselling. But also, too, plenty of allegations made of babies surviving an abortion procedure and being left to die. Now, there's a group coalescing, left, right, Nationals, crossbenchers, sorry, not Nationals, crossbenchers, Liberal and Labor, who want to put some amendments forward to try and remediate the legislation flaws as they see it. Corinne, where do you think this is going to go? Because we've got 2 Liberals who say they'll sit on the crossbench if the Premier doesn't sort this out.
Yeah, I mean, she's really walked straight into this mess, hasn't she? I think, as you say, there's several strands to this whole discussion. I think the majority of people do think that abortion should be decriminalised in New South Wales. That's probably fairly clear-cut. But as far as late-term abortions, gender-selective abortions, no one can convince anyone saying that that's progress. It's anyone with a heart and a little bit of humanity should really have some questions to ask themselves about that, and morally, where do we draw that line? And I think that's the problem. The actual decriminalising aspect of abortion in New South Wales should be really clear. But, the left like to pretend that this whole issue is very straightforward. It's a very complicated, very complex, very emotive, emotionally charged discussion. But I do think that actually most people come down quite clearly and say they do have a problem with late-term abortions and they do have a problem with gender selection, rightly so, in my opinion.
Well, right down here in Canberra, Zali Steggall's banging on the table saying the Morrison government must declare a climate emergency, Jack, in the election campaign. She said this about the vehicle she drives and promised to clean up her environmental act. Let's have a listen.
I, like every other Australian, have budget pressures, mortgage pressures. I don't just have a summer money ready to buy a new car whenever I'm ready.
That was actually from today, but was reiterating the point that she made in the election campaign: elect me and I'll get myself an electric car. Well, she still hasn't got the electric car, And if she wants to whinge about what she earns, Jack, it's at least double what most Australians earn, at double the average income in Australia. Why doesn't she just, do what she says others should do?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, her base wage is $211,000 a year, and she's been in there for several months now and earned, before tax, more than $50,000. I'm sure if she traded in her four-wheel drive, which, by the way, is a combustion engine vehicle and emits a lot of carbon, then she might have a little bit of money left over for an entry-level electric vehicle. But this is the whole issue with electric vehicles. They're quite expensive. They're a bit cost-prohibitive. So Zali Steggall is one of these politicians that are advocating for us to transition rapidly to a market which is cost-prohibitive, and she herself has not found a way that she could afford it. Let's remember, she was a barrister before this. It's not like she's gone from making sandwiches at Subway to straight into as a federal member. She was a barrister in Sydney, and I find it quite hilarious to think that if a barrister living in Sydney on the North Shore can't afford an electric car, then how is anybody in Australia going to be able to?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think maybe the issue is that right now the taxpayer pays for her car and pays for her fuel, and she's pretty happy to stay with that circumstance as opposed to plugging into the wall like everyone else with an electric car. Anyway, have to leave it there. Lots of other things I want to get to tonight. Corinne Barraclough and Jack Horton, as always, thanks very much for your time tonight.
Thank you.